by the Vendôme Hotel countless times and driven by it as well, usually stuck in traffic. It just never occurred to me to walk inside. And I was unaware of just how beautiful the view of the Mediterranean is. When you go up to the rooftop restaurant, Sydney's, and it is an expansive, uninterrupted view of the sea, which unfortunately has become an exception today. You need to be on the coast, physically, right next to the water, and elevated, if you're lucky, at one of these buildings that have recently been built on the Corniche, to actually appreciate the view. This is among the worst urban planning decisions made in Beirut's history, blocking access to the sea for most of the city's residents. St. George Hotel is just literally down the street, and the St. George, the site of Rafik Hariri's assassination in February of 2005. And behind the St. George, of course, the Holiday Inn, unrestored, and the Phoenicia Hotel, brought back to life. So the location, in a way, is quite telling of the last few decades of Beirut's history, from the Civil War, out of the Civil War, and the recent events that took place with Hariri's assassination and onwards. Now, I was actually hesitant at meeting today's guest, Amal Mudallali, at this restaurant in Le Vendôme for two reasons. The first, there's so much traffic. This is one of the most congested parts of Beirut. And all the car horns, the trucks passing by, and just the general noise. I thought we wouldn't be able to catch anything from the conversation, from outside noise. But double-glazed, triple-glazed windows, whatever it is silent. It is so quiet at this restaurant. And a unique experience to be able to see all the sea and to actually sit there in peace, relative calm. It's really out of this world. So I was wrong about that. It's very, very quiet upstairs. Of course, the second reason is that I thought there would be too much background noise. Too many people moving in and out, coffee cups clinking and all that. So it was empty when I got there. There was no one there. As the conversation picked up, we did have people sitting next to us. There was some background noise, background chatter. I was able to filter out most of it. I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Lebanon's ambassador to the UN, Amal Mudallali. And this is the Beirut Banyan. I'd like to start with the UN, and not from 2019, from late 1940s, post-World War II, early 1950s, with probably the most famous Lebanese representative to the UN, also Lebanese ambassador to the US, Charles Malik. And earlier today, I was listening to him advising the Americans on Soviet thought and talking about Yugoslavia and Italy and Trieste land dispute, about Marxism. And you see these reporters praising him for his intellectual ability. Lebanon is then giving advice to the West. Lebanon is 1.5 million population. Lebanon is very new, and it's being turned to. Not only that, this ambassador helped with the Declaration of Human Rights.
Absolutely.
He made Lebanon famous right at its birth, and you are the current ambassador in the same role. And I want to ask you, do you think about Charles Malik when you think about your current post? Is he in the back of your mind in any way, whether it's through those clips online or whether it's through your own position and maybe carrying that legacy? Mm-hmm. Is he in the background?
Yes. There are two people. There are two people in the back of my mind, and I felt the weight of the responsibility when I was appointed, and I went and started reading their stuff. Ghassan Touaini and Charles Malik, because they are two ambassadors who really defined the role of a UN ambassador. Charles Malik, at the founding of the United Nations, it was unbelievable to see a Lebanese ambassador, a Lebanese person who was there at the creation, at the founding of the United Nations, playing a very important role. Many Arab countries did not have representatives. Yes. They did not have from their own countries. They had even Lebanese representing them and stuff like that. The Lebanese were working for Lebanon and working for others. So Charles Malik was a very important person because he was a philosopher. He was a political person. He was a very good writer. He was a good orator. He's the person who believed in the human person, in humanity. And it's astounding when you see that a Lebanese man was one of 3 representatives who wrote the Human Rights Declaration 70 years ago.
70 years ago.
Look at the others. They are America
Yes.
and France. See, Lebanon, the small, young,
Right.
the Republic Lebanon, and then you have France and America.
France, America, China, if I'm not mistaken,
China was there,
and there
but
was
no.
another-
But the Human Rights Declaration was mostly written by the Chinese. There was a representative, but mostly the French, the Lebanese, and the Americans are the leaders who did that. But there was a Chinese representative.
But it's still not a bad. I mean,
It's not bad. Even if there are 5 or 4, it's not bad. He was a very exceptional man. And, I was really surprised because he did not stay 3 years, 5 years at the UN. He stayed for a year. He didn't stay that long, which tells you really don't have to stay 5 or 10 years in a place to make a difference. If you make a difference, you make it even in half a year. And he did. And then you had Ghassan Twaini after that. Ghassan Twaini was a different time. During Charles Malik time, Lebanon did not have the conflicts that it had when Ghassan Twaini was there. Lebanon at that time was not out there during Malik, was out there in the mainstream, trying to put the foundations of the UN, whether it's the charter, whether it's the Human Rights Declaration, whatever it is. But during Ghassan Twaini's time, Lebanon became a party on the council's table as a party, as a victim, as a country that was bleeding and it had a cause there. So it's a different time.
Absolutely. And it's also a different time, but not that far apart.
It's not far apart. Let's see how, like for instance, the first resolution on Lebanon at the United Nations was 1958.
Right.
And it was asking basically the Syrians not to interfere in Lebanon. I don't know if you know that.
Well, we have Fuad Shahab, and then we have all these...
after the revolution.
Exactly,
in 58, there was a revolution.
Yes.
So it's a different times, but these are 2 amazing men who really played a very important role and left their mark in New York.
What's quite interesting, though, so let's sort of put it from the beginning to end. You have a philosopher, but not really best known for his philosophy. Maybe he's better known as a diplomat.
Absolutely.
And Ghassan Twaini, a journalist, first and foremost, but his legacy is also included in diplomacy. And then you have the victimization of Lebanon. 3 decades earlier, Lebanon is giving advice. 3 decades later, Lebanon is trying to rebuild itself.
Absolutely.
And then today, maybe you can tell me what is Lebanon's position today? Is anyone coming to us for any advice, or are we in perpetual victimization for the time being?
No, we're not in perpetual victimization. You have to remember that in this time, this gap of years you're talking about, we had a civil war.
Yeah.
Lebanon went through a very, very difficult time, and many countries intervened in Lebanon. So the foreign intervention in the country, whether military or political, left a mark on the country, and I think also affected the psyche of the Lebanese, because now you talk to Lebanese and everybody says, so what is going to happen to us? What are they planning for us? The Lebanese lost this sense of like, we are the masters of our fate. We can do it. We can do this. They're always afraid, or they're always concerned that somebody else is coming to have some impact on their lives, or if not invade them, interfere in their affairs and stuff like that, to the extent that they sometimes invite it. They don't feel that themselves they can do it. So it's always somebody from outside who can do things, and not us.
Although we're 3 decades after the Civil War ended, and that's twice as long as the war itself.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that psyche pervasive?
Because I think since the Civil War, the country did not recover completely from the impact of the regional and international players playing in the country.
So in a way, Charles
And
Malik
some
was
of
lucky.
them, some of them, he was lucky.
Yeah.
Some of them, actually, it's beneficial for them because sometimes the local actors some kind of use the outside actors against other actors in the country to have more power.
It's a common theme I've seen in all types of issues that no matter how talented the individual, and you can have someone excelling at diplomacy in your position today or in any position, that it's irrelevant because the regional factors do outweigh anything domestic or anything sovereign. And it seems like Lebanon's sovereignty is the issue at hand.
Because if you will it and if you believe it, it will happen. But if you say, I'm not letting anybody interfere in our internal affair, it will happen. But unfortunately, it's not the case. People let other people interfere in their affairs because parties in Lebanon historically, they always looked for outside parties to use them against another opponent internally.
When you're there in New York or wherever you're traveling representing Lebanon to the UN, are you able yourself to overcome these obstacles that are probably pervasive today? Regional influences on Lebanon, and I'm sure it impacts your role too. Are you able to rebut any of this?
Yes, of course, because you represent the country. And the Americans have a very interesting saying. They say our differences stop at the water's edge. The water's edge being the Atlantic and the Pacific.
Yeah.
So there's no matter what our differences are, we don't send them outside. So when you are representing a country, you have to speak in the name of the country as a whole. These actually, because you're looking at the country from 30,000 feet. You're not looking at the small problems that people are doing. So you don't talk about these issues. You ignore them. You completely deny them, even if people bring them up. It's like, no, it's not this way, it's that way. And you present a united vision of the country because no matter what our differences are in the country, but there is something, a thread that ties all of us together, which is basically Lebanon as a country, as an identity, as a place where we have a common future, no matter what our differences are. So this when you are outside representing the country, this is what you try to present. You don't dwell on internal domestic issues and what people are going through.
Would you say, though, that's the consistent saying, even when things are terrible, that is...
Look, you can't lie. You have to sometimes be honest too.
Sure.
So you could say this is what's happening, but this happens in every country and it will pass. So you have to put it in perspective. You don't dwell on it, you don't whatever, but you don't lie too because you have to have credibility. You can't say to people, oh no, it's like there's nothing. No, there are, we have differences, but now thankfully there are problems everywhere. So you can say, we are part of the world and this is the world today. And we have problems, we have differences, but our things that we have in common are much more than our differences, and
but it's always. I mean, sorry to keep going back to him, but Charles Malik, it's almost insane that he's explaining Lebanon to the West in ways that the West is almost like we can benefit from learning from Lebanon. Christian Muslim intermingling, you have West and East and all that stuff.
But you have to remember, you're talking about the 50s.
Exactly.
And in the 50s, even in the West, especially America, America was new in the East at that time. That's the time when they start taking over from the British. So the Americans did not know the Middle East very well. So anybody who came new, he would become, the teacher, the most important guide for them and stuff like that. Now it's completely different.
Now the Americans
and the world is different now.
They still do listen in many different ways, and I think this is a good way to kind of step back a bit into your previous job. So prior to the UN, you were a DC think tank, well-established voice on all issues related to Lebanon. Did that position, in your opinion, have a more direct influence on any policy making than your current position? Or do you think that the UN is still instrumental in shifting or maybe gauging minds on how to approach Lebanon?
It's a completely different ball game. When you are in Washington, your interaction with America and American government and stuff like that is very different when you're at the UN dealing with United States or any other country to try to influence their position, whatever. In Washington, it's completely different. In Washington, if you're at a think tank, people listen to you, and they perceive you as neutral, as objective. And so you are an expert. You give them your opinion. They listen to you. When you are an ambassador of a country, people take it with a grain of salt. This is the position of the country.
So in other words, a career move, an upgrade on the ladder, but a downgrade on influence.
Absolutely. When you speak now, you speak in the voice of a country. So they take it as the position of the country. They listen to it, and they, you affect their position if it's in line with their interests.
Right.
But if you are in a think tank, people perceive you as a neutral and objective, then they take your position without feeling that, you are giving a position of somebody, so you're not beholden to anybody. So it's more accepted.
And what exactly took you into the think tank world? Was it directly related to Rafik Hariri's assassination, or was that already in the background, that you were heading in that direction, that you're going to be in the sort of the research end and the sort of the DC circuit?
No, I was working for the Prime Minister at that time, for Mr. Hariri, Saad, and I wanted a voice. I wanted to see what happened. I'm very curious. I wanted to see how think tanks work, and I wanted to have an independent voice, because when you are working for the Prime Minister, as I said to you, you're representing somebody.
Yeah.
So people take it as you are a party, but a think tank, they take it as objective, so they listen to you better.
I'd like to just gauge your mind a bit on, maybe not too long ago, Lebanon's current situation vis-a-vis regional politics, and primarily Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other countries as well. You, as representing this tiny piece of real estate at the UN with all its problems, are you in a position to actually have those other countries take your advice? Or is that a completely lost cause, that they don't care? Whatever Lebanon says is none of our concern. What I'm getting at in particular is, it's not too long ago that the UN helped usher in countries that were very delicate, very fragile, and they'd be neutralized. Case in point is Austria. And Austria could have ended up in a much worse situation. Regional tensions, suddenly it's neutralized, and there's a state treaty on neutralization. Austria is left out of the Cold War, and it thrives. Lebanon, it seems like it deserves that kind of treatment, where things are just too delicate, too tense, too violent. Could you see yourself in that kind of role, advocating neutralization of Lebanon?
You cannot talk about neutralization of Lebanon, because...
You can't talk about it.
No, I mean, you can't explain why. Because there has to be a policy of the country, there has to be a consensus in the country on having a neutral country. I mean, and there's no consensus on that. And when you are at the UN...
7 years ago there was, right?
But now there is no consensus.
Can I ask you though, what happened to that consensus officially? That consensus, did it last even 5 seconds? Or is it just...
But I'm not sure there was a consensus at that time. There were parties in Lebanon that they wanted neutral Lebanon, neutralization, and there were parties against it.
Is there any maneuvering in your current role to at least build the foundation for a neutral Lebanon, or help build that? Or is that just something you cannot do?
Look, when you are representing the country, you have to represent the official policy of the country. The policy statement of the government is your guide. The policy statement of the country talks about the Baghdad Declaration, talks about the association policy, talks about these things. So you abide by that. You say, this is our policy. So if there's any party in the country that says something different, this is not the official policy of the country. So what do you mean by neutralization of the country?
What I mean is that regional
Lebanon is a neutral country, does not care about any regional issue, about the Palestinian issue, about any other Arab problem or something. What do you mean?
More basic, that regional tensions do not mean regional interference in Lebanese affairs, the way Austria was treated. Austria did not have any American or Russian...
Lebanon is not Austria, my dear.
But now we're going against the passion of the first UN ambassador. And we're going against...
But the UN ambassador also had his detractors. People did not like his political positions too.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Lebanon has always had
That's true.
has always had people for this and for that. You never had a consensus in the country about anything in
I
its
would
history.
fully agree, but I think many Austrians were probably upset when suddenly Austria found itself in a situation that was neutral, but it seemed to work.
Yeah, but in the country, I don't think you'll find anybody who wants to have a neutral country now. Go and ask for anybody.
Are we too late to advocate for something like that? Is that what I'm getting?
It's not about too late. People feel that we are part of a region, and that you cannot just pull yourself out of the region and say we are neutral, we don't care, because you are part of the Arab world. You are part of a region. I wish we are Austria. I wish we can say, okay, just leave us alone. We don't want to do anything. We don't want anybody to do anything to us. We want people to just get out of here and leave us alone. I don't think it's this simple. People will not. There will not be a consensus on this. Many people would want that, and I'm assuming that probably the majority of the regular people on the street want that. But I don't think it will happen, because politically and political reality in the country is that some people are going to feel like this is a policy that's going to pull Lebanon out of its Arab roots, out of our region, out of this and that, because we have to care who we are and stuff like that.
Not so much the identity of the country or the language or even the passion or the eagerness and willingness to defend legitimate rights, whether it's the Palestinian cause or anything like that. More to do with when a country can pervert Lebanon's sovereignty to a point that Lebanon is degrading. And I mean it more in terms of arms, and I mean it in terms of violence. Not so much culture, because I don't think that's really the issue. I don't think anyone's complaining about Lebanon's culture. And I say neutralization in the most positive way, which is a region that has reached the worst phases of its history.
I understand, and I think the majority of Lebanese, probably, if you talk to them on a daily basis, they want to be left alone. They want to have their lives. They want to have normal life. They don't want interference in their affairs. They don't want anything. But the reality on the ground, I don't think it's going to happen. And when you go, look, now we have this dissociation policy, okay? And many times, I tell you the truth, actually, it's so comforting, because when there's something so divisive and so polarizing, you just say, I'm sorry, this is our dissociation policy and we cannot intervene. And it's easy to do that. But unfortunately, most of the time, we don't have the luxury to do that. That's the reality of this. So unfortunately, sometimes political reality pulls you in so many different directions, and you cannot. It's utopia to say we're going to be neutral, and because we're not, as you said, we're not Austria. You have a different history, you have a different region, you have different parties, groups here, you have political culture. It's a completely different country.
I agree with you fully, and I think that's why Lebanon deserves it more than Austria. For
Probably
those
we
reasons.
deserve it, but unfortunately, I don't think we'll get it. Hopefully, I wish we can get to this country to be left alone, to build itself, to live, but I don't think it will happen.
And I think of the UN today. I try not to think only about Resolution 1701 or 425 or the resolutions that primarily to do with war or occupation or all that. I think of the UN more in terms of states respecting their boundaries. And I get from you that Lebanon can only operate in the position of utmost weakness today.
No, that's not true. That's not true. Why would Lebanon... every country from out of the 193 countries operate from they take the source, whatever it is, of their political actions and political positions from their reality. And Lebanon is not that weak on the international stage. Lebanon is respected on the international stage. At the United Nations, Lebanon is very well respected. The EU membership, the first person they call is us when they want to have a resolution that has to do with the human rights, that has to do with any issue, humanitarian issue or something. They know that Lebanon always takes a principled position. And this is a point of strength, not of weakness. On the human rights level, on the social issues, women's issues, we are shining.
With respect to the region, of course, we're looking great.
We always side with the right side. We're always on the side of history on these issues. But when you're talking about political issues and you say the UN, people say the UN and they don't understand how this works, because what is the UN? The UN is the sum of the countries that are there. There are 193 countries, but the countries that really make the difference there in terms of peace and security are 15 members, the Security Council members, and then the real ones who make the decisions are the 5 permanent members.
Yeah.
Not even the 10 who are non-permanent, because any one of the 5 can block anything. So Lebanon has a peace and security issue on the Security Council. We have 1701, we have the Israeli occupation, you have the border, the demarcation, the delineation of the maritime border. We have these issues. Do we perform from a weakness? I don't think so. We perform from weakness, but we perform from a reality point of view, and the reality is that you have a Security Council make-up that it prevents anything from happening if it's not conducive to some parties and not the others. Yeah. So you are weak if you are not able to play that well for your own benefit, but you're strong if you know how to manage the negotiations in a way that you have everybody on board next to you. And thank God it's been happening that we are able to perform in a way that will keep this situation in the South and 1701 and all the issues of peace and security in good position for Lebanon's interest.
But when you do have an external flow of weapons coming into Lebanon, can Lebanon even express concern about that at the UN? Because I know you're absolutely right. We are good in the things that do matter towards human rights, towards social issues. We do shine with respect to the region, absolutely. And even in our worst days, I think we were still ahead. But I'm talking more along state sovereignty and respect of borders. Can you imagine Lebanon today saying to another country, please do not arm certain segments of Lebanese territory, Lebanese groups?
The issue of sovereignty is a very important issue for every country now, and Lebanon is one of them. But there's a reality in the country. There's a reality now that everybody is dealing with it in his own way. And, there's a very famous play by Ibsen. It's Galileo. Galileo, have you ever...
No,
this poor country doesn't have a hero. And he says, no, poor the country that needs a hero.
Heroes.
You need heroes everywhere in the Arab world now.
Yeah.
You need people who stand up on principle and say, this cannot go, this cannot pass, this cannot happen.
I personally think the heroes that did emerge were eliminated for the reasons that I was getting at earlier, which is our sovereignty is not respected. And you can have types of attacks, whether they're invasions or whether they're assassinations, because of Lebanon's inability to affect neutrality. That's maybe an endless debate, and I think it'll probably keep going for decades.
Yeah.
Now,
so let's move somewhere else.
Let's go back to the beginning of your story. What took you into this world to begin with? Because I know you left Lebanon on a scholarship, and you were given every opportunity to perhaps say goodbye to Lebanon and base yourself in the U.S. What got you immersed in Lebanese politics?
Exactly. I'll tell you a funny story. I'm from Bekaa, from Rawda, Dayat Sghiri, for my mother's side. And there was nobody even go to high school in that time. So I came to Beirut. My father brought me down to Beirut with all my stuff. And he said to me on the road, he said, okay, you go to Beirut, you go to university, you do whatever you want, but you do not get involved in politics. And I said, okay.
Sure. So how long ago was this? You're
my
25,
God.
so
yeah,
that was
I was 1981.
81. Okay.
Yeah.
So during the Civil War.
Yeah. I came during the Civil War here.
You came to Beirut.
And I stayed in Beirut. I lived in Verdun Street with the nuns, French nuns.
Oh, wow.
The Dominican nuns, because he would not let me stay in an apartment. I mean, good girls don't stay in apartments.
But he's insisting no politics.
No politics.
For good reason.
No.
6 years of a civil war.
And I went studied journalism.
Oh, yeah, which is close enough.
No politics. And so I was working here as I was in a university, and then by chance I went to An-Nahar to interview somebody in An-Nahar as a graduate from the university, the communications department.
Now, An-Nahar back then, which part of Beirut was An-Nahar based?
Hamra.
In Hamra. So you were
That's
able to
An-Nahar.
move around West Beirut during
West
the civil war?
Beirut, you
Okay.
can.
Yes.
So I interviewed them, and they offered me a job to work in the student affairs section. So I was working covering student affairs in the university. And then the Israeli invasion came.
Oh, so you
in 82.
1982. So
Yeah.
1 year later,
Yeah.
and you're covering
I was covering, 1 year later, after covering students, the invasion happened, and then the men in the newspaper could not go out to the field. So they sent us, the girls, sent me to the Arab University where Arafat was, and all the PLO, and all over West Beirut. I was covering their news because we could go out, you know. But after the war finished, Israeli invasion finished, suddenly they want us to go back to the student section, and the people who were in the political have to go and resume their jobs.
I'm guessing that's impossible.
It was difficult because I said to them, we are not a chair, leg of a chair that you can put it on and off. We are,
And you're suddenly a war correspondent within your own
exactly,
in your own city.
You put your life in danger also, because it was very scary. It was covering the invasion was not easy.
You stayed in Beirut during the shelling, during the siege, covering the war.
I was under siege, and one day actually I read in the newspapers that a plane hit cars, a convoy of cars, and they put names of people, and it was similar to my parents, my father's name, and I thought my family was killed, and for a month I did not know if they were still alive. It was very hard. And then the siege was lifted, and then I got out, and we went through Israeli checkpoints to Bekaa. It took us like 7 hours to make it to Bekaa because of the checkpoints. Yeah, so it was a very difficult time.
But that's your first intimate experience with politics.
Yes,
in its cruelest
absolutely.
form.
I went to the camps. I went after the massacre, but thank God they would not let me in. I just entered. I was in the entrance, and the Lebanese army will not. That's in. It was the Lebanese army. There was some military people on the. I don't know if it was the UN or somebody will not let us in. I don't remember. It's been a long time, so I left. And after we saw the pictures of what happened, I was so thankful I did not get in. I want to cover it. Anyway, so after the invasion, I didn't want to stay in Lebanon. I want to stay. I went to Beirut, to AUB for like a semester, I think 2 semesters, and then I left in the 83. I left to America.
What were you studying?
At the American University, political science.
So all the advice thrown out the window. Goodbye.
Absolutely.
It's quite interesting. You're studying politics and you're covering war at home. It's
Absolutely.
You're not learning this from some ivory tower in New England.
Absolutely.
You're doing it here.
Yeah.
And then you leave.
I got a scholarship from the Lebanese University, and I left. I went to American embassy. It was still on the Corniche. I got.
You're not far away from us here.
Yeah. I got the visa. After 2 weeks, the embassy was bombed, and I went and covered the bombing of the embassy on the Corniche. It was very hard to go there and see it. After you were there 2 weeks before, and then it was bombed in '83.
So you've been covering torment in Beirut for now nearly 4 decades.
Yeah.
Whether you're here or abroad, wow. So this starts in its cruelest form. Beirut is completely at war. Anarchy, Israeli invasion.
Especially during the invasion, it was unbelievable.
And you managed to get the visa. The embassy is blown up. You're covering the explosion, but the visa still gets you to America.
I went to America. I went to Syracuse.
You went to Syracuse. Now, I cannot imagine a complete opposite place from Beirut than Syracuse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a place where 6 months of snow, a very quiet small town, nothing happens there.
But you're not at home. No. When was the next time you'd return to Lebanon?
Oh, I stayed 5 years without coming back to Lebanon because the economy collapsed in '86.
Yes.
The pound collapsed, and so my whole scholarship for the whole year was $800. So I could not I could not stay in Syracuse. I could not pay for my tuition, whatever. So I could not come home because I had no money. And I remember I sent a letter to my parents through the Red Cross because there were no cell phones, no phones. Everything was cut off. Lebanon was really cut off in the 80s.
Yes. Yeah.
So I still have the letter I sent to my parents. And I have letters from my parents also. They sent it to me in the 80s. So I moved to Washington from Syracuse because I couldn't continue there without money. And in Washington, I started working as a journalist and put myself in Maryland.
But what took you into the world of Rafik Hariri and post-war reconstruction? How did you enter that?
I didn't know Rafik Hariri. I knew Saad Hariri. Saad was a student in New York and Washington, and I was a student there. So I used to see him sometimes. Yeah.
So the friendship is from.
Yeah, I knew him then.
I see.
I knew him I knew him well, and I used to say hi whenever they are. I mean, I didn't hang out with them because we're different age and different.
He was a Georgetown student.
But yeah, he was a Georgetown, but I used to see him in public places and restaurants, whatever. And then one day, Rafik Hariri went to visit, and Saad was there, so I said hi to him. And that was it. He didn't remember me. But then one other trip he went, he had a press conference at the National Press Building. So I went to the press conference, and he said, when you come to Lebanon, visit us. So I said, okay. I was so happy. The Prime Minister asked you as a journalist to visit him, you know. So I came to visit him, and he offered me a job.
Oh, wow. So
yeah.
So I see. This is quite nice. So you actually, this is all by chance.
By chance. I didn't know him at all.
And you were given the job.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the job is still America-based.
No,
it's
he asked me to come here.
So you were happy to come back.
No,
no,
I didn't want to come back.
Didn't want to.
But there was something stronger than you. It pulled you, and I came.
What was it to you, though? Because this pull,
I don't know.
This pull, which is not very easy to explain, I think my father and many people like him and you had that urge to return in the 1990s, even when things were not settled. I mean, Lebanon is under Syrian rule or indirect rule. Lebanon is still in shatters. And you have a voice with a lot of promise, Rafik Hariri, saying things that are quite tempting and it's almost seductive. Were you taken from that and said, I believe I believe in this man, and therefore I am ready to give Lebanon another try? And what I'm getting at is, without Rafik Hariri, without that job offer,
I wouldn't have come back.
You wouldn't have come back.
No.
Yeah.
No, but because I felt this is my best chance to go home. If I want to go home, this is the best way to go and be part of something
because
important.
You'd be fixing.
Yeah, you'd be part of something important. Something you're helping the country. You are playing an important role. You are rebuilding the country. You know, it's important to be part of this. I felt like it's history, and you'll be part of it. It's important. And he was bigger than life. You know, it was like, oh my God, you're going to work for Rafik Hariri. Oh my God, it was so big at that time.
And it did pull back a lot of people that we both know.
Yeah, because he gave you hope, you know?
Yeah.
He gave you hope that this is going to be the most amazing ride of your life, you know?
Yeah.
To be able to play a role in your country, but you do it at the highest level with the best person in the world and stuff like that, you know? So you felt you're contributing.
You're contributing. With him, in a way, by your side, supporting you. But then when you came back, I'm guessing you saw his role diminished in front of you. And this is when there was a lot of pressure on him domestically. And he was forced to resign, and then he was put in a difficult place, which ultimately ended up with his assassination. But you stayed, and you were committed. What, in those years, what was the driving force? Was it, I'm going to push against all the odds and make sure that this man succeeds? Or was it, I'm here now, I will not leave again, that's it, my calling, and no matter what happens, I belong to Lebanon?
No, it was because of him.
Him.
You stayed for him because it was so unfair what happened to him. It was a challenge, and you wanted to be able to help. You wanted to stay, and you want to make sure that he was wronged, and you want to help him correct that wrong because he's the right person for the country, and they want to derail the country from that path, and you want to help. You want to be part of that. So you stay.
You stay.
Yeah, and he asked me to stay because I offered him that I would leave.
Right.
And he said, I wanted to stay and be part of the family, and whatever happens, will be here. And so I stayed.
And then
He reassured me.
he reassured you, but then you had to go again.
After he died.
Yeah.
After he died, I lost hope.
Yeah.
I felt like if this man, with all his power, with all his connections, with all his money, with everything he had and his personality and everything, could not make a change in this country, nothing will. That's how I felt exactly at that time.
I think that shock of what happened to him is what drove Lebanese really to the breaking point, because no one saw this happening. 8 years later, clearly not at the same level and a very different man, but the reaction to my father's assassination, I think, was so flickering that it almost, and I know there's very different weight, it's a very different...
No, I understand.
But it's quite amazing that in 8 years, the resurgence can also fade very quickly. And it is also quite telling that there have been no assassinations since, which to me means that there is a sad ending to this story. And do you find today Lebanon entering a perhaps period of relative calm, given what's happening in Syria now, or do you see Lebanon entering a very unstable future? How do you see?
I don't see conflict on the scale that we saw any time in our future, in our history before, because I think the Lebanese learned a big lesson from their history, and I don't think they're going to repeat it again. Even if you see small, pulling and pushing here and there and political gridlock and stuff like that, I don't see a civil war. The other thing is, for civil wars to happen, you need money.
There's no money to fund the violence. So here's the nice consequence of a broke country with a failing economy. Not enough money to fund war.
No. Not the money inside the country. When the civil war happened, many regional countries were pouring money in weapons in Lebanon to fight. People have their own wars now in the region. Everybody has his own problem. Nobody's now thinking about Lebanon or what's going to happen or Lebanon and stuff like that.
I see sometimes quite interesting events happening. You have a civil marriage that we both attended, a ceremony at Surso Palace not too long ago. And we saw an attempt, a symbolic attempt, at bringing a civil marriage to life in Lebanon. Of course, we're talking in 2019 about something simple, a civil marriage signing and registration. I think on the smallest scale, that is too difficult. On the large scale, it's multiple times harder to fix things. I've seen Lebanon degrade over the last few years, and I'm a post-war generation. You're a little older than me. You saw some of the good years as maybe in your youth, and then you saw the country collapse and maybe rebuild itself to a certain point. But I can't see my kids having a better future here than I have today. And I find that very distressing, very, very, it's not just sad, it's that you're almost forced to face the fact that this country doesn't improve over time. No matter who's trying, no matter who the heroes are at any given point. And the most talented do leave. Lebanon has the most successful engineers, I think, in the region, and we have probably the worst transportation system possible. We have talented diplomats, and we have all these...
My niece just got married Saturday to a Maronite. She did civil marriage in Cyprus, but she went to church, and she had a church because his family wants a church, so we did it. So I have hope for the new generation. I think the new generation is really amazing in terms of rejecting all these old rules and stuff like that. I think things will change with time. It's not going to stay the same. The new generation is going in the right direction. The problem is when you have a political system based on sectarian basis, when you have that tying you down to all these old rules, nothing will change. So because sectarian systems produce sectarian wars, and they don't build real countries. So this somehow, maybe the new generation one day will decide that we need to have something different. We need to live by different rules. We need to look at human beings only as human beings, regardless of their race or color or religion or sect or whatever persuasion they have. So I think this is our only hope.
What would you tell your successor when you leave the UN? What would you tell the next Lebanese ambassador? And what would your advice be for the future of diplomacy with Lebanon and the UN?
You have to plan for Lebanon at the UN 10, 15 years, 20 years from now, because we have 193 countries. If you don't plan what positions Lebanon should be in, what boards we should be on, when we should be on the Security Council, when we should have the presidency of the General Assembly and stuff like that. These don't happen overnight. You have to put the requests 20, 30 years before. So if you are there, don't think of your day. Think of 20 years from now, what Lebanon needs, and put it there.
Then you should write this book soon so that we can have a template to use 2 decades from now.
Thank you.
The sun's down. Amal, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The example of Austria may be a bit far-fetched for Lebanon, but it's just really to show that there are instances when regional conflict can be sort of allayed, where countries can thrive even when there's extreme conflict nearby. So we didn't come to an agreement there, but there was another issue that Amal brought up, which I thought was interesting, that she puts the burden on sectarianism, a less religious state environment where people are not registered as confessions or religions, where you're actually just a Lebanese citizen, is something that is very much desired among most Lebanese I know. The next episode will be with Nadim Shehadi, a well-renowned Lebanese historian. He's the current president of Lebanese American University, New York campus. And Nadim Shehadi does not think of sectarianism as a bad word. He actually thinks of secularism as more dangerous to Lebanon than sectarianism. So it's not a rebuttal per se against Amal Mudallali, but it's maybe a defense of the old power-sharing model that Lebanon inherited from Ottoman years, and the only country in the Middle East that still retains it, a power-sharing among confessions. And Nadim he's a champion of that, and he doesn't think that sectarianism is a problem for Lebanon. On the contrary, it's the way Lebanon should be, and the region should adopt that model as opposed to reject it. So we jump into how this whole thing started, what we inherited, and the benefits of that system, and where the real problems are today. We had Amal Mudallali in Beirut talking about the UN in New York. Next episode will be in New York, at LAU's New York campus, with Nadim Shehadi. I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.